Okay, moving right along, we're going to move into module 3. We're going to be looking at sensor size essentials and just what does it mean by changing the sensor size and the aspect ratio and all that. How does that affect our shots? This is where we left off in module 2. We're going to go ahead and load up module 3. And I just wanted to do this to kind of show you how we're going to work through this class. You can go ahead and follow along if you want. You can just watch and then do your own experimentation on the side. But if you do want to follow along, we're going to go module by module. Of course, when you do load up a new module, then you're going to have cameras that have already been created because that's what I'm doing as I'm recording, right? So in this case, as we load up module 3, come down to cinematics and make sure we load up the module 3 sequence so we get our actors in place. And you'll notice that there's already a camera. Now, this isn't exactly the same camera we just left off because I've already gone ahead and made it look good. But I'm going to show you the step-by-step process on how to get to this result right here. So you saw where we left off, and now the goal is to get to this result right here. I just wanted to show you that if you are following the class step by step, you will be seeing a camera that's already been created. And then I will do a new one from scratch so you can follow along and on how to get to that result. So with that being said, I just wanted to show you one quick little tip here because as we create more cameras, this viewport might get a little bit cumbersome to look at because these cameras are so huge. We can go ahead and do a quick little tip here and just make it smaller. So if we select our camera here, Close-Up Ziva, we can go into the Transform tab, make sure the lock is sealed, and then we'll go ahead and hit 0.5. That'll just make it half the size and just much more manageable. So whenever we duplicate this camera, we will have a smaller size camera like this. And if they're still big in next modules, because they might be, just know that that's a quick way to make that smaller. So what I'm going to do now, since we've already have this camera is already pretty much set, we're going to just create a new one. And I'm going to just do that what we did on the previous module. I'm going to go ahead and navigate in the viewport like so. And then we're going to do our create camera here, Cine Camera Actor. And then we have a new camera. We'll go ahead and look through that one. And boom, we're back to square one with all the default settings in this mode, which is it puts you in an 11.88 focal length and with the default sensor sizes. Okay, so now that we're back to square one where we were in module 2, we're going to go ahead and show you how we can get to our other result. But before we do that, I'm going to go ahead and rename this to Close-Up Ziva V2. Go ahead and drag that back into our camera folder. Okay, great. And let's take a look at sensor size. So if you click on the camera and on the details panel down here, you'll see there was a bunch of settings, and we'll go through all of these in future modules. But for now, we're going to look at the film back or the sensor size. Essentially, it's the same thing. And you'll see that there's a few presets right here for 16:9 digital film. There's Super 8, IMAX, 35, etc. If you click on these, you'll see that the sensor width and height is going to change, and the aspect ratio down here, which you can't change, will also be different. So let's go ahead and check out Super 8. You'll see now all of a sudden the sensor size is way smaller. Aspect ratio is 144. And that's completely changing the feel of our shots, right? So just know that when you're setting this up, this is going to be a very important step for you to get the feel that you're looking for your short film or your narrative movie, or even if it's previs and you want to match the cameras that you'd be shooting with on set. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to do our own. So go ahead and you can select custom. It's actually going to go straight to custom as we type in new numbers. You'll see that if I drag this, we're changing the aspect ratio. And if I drag it to the right on the sensor height, we're making the sensor bigger and bigger and bigger. And what's happening? Our lens is getting wider. And that's just a general rule of thumb that the larger the sensor size, right, the wider the lens is going to look through that sensor. And the tighter or the smaller the sensor size, the tighter that our lens is going to look, right? So you can do this manually and just set up whatever custom aspect ratio and sensor size you want to do. But what we're going to do here is we're going to actually look at a website that has the exact sensor sizes and aspect ratios that we would like to mimic, and we're going to do that. So in this case, I'm going to pop up this website over here. It's called vfxcamdatabase.com, vfxcamdb.com. And it has just a list of all the most used cameras. You have film cameras, Reds, digital cameras, Alexas, Blackmagics, and pretty much anything you'd probably need. And so what we're going to do, since we're kind of trying to achieve the most cinematic look we can, we're going to use the ARRI Alexa LF, which is what most movies are shooting on now these days. So I'm going to do that, click there, and let's take a look at the 239 mode, which is and this is the sensor size right here, 36.7 by 15.31. That's what we're going to do. This is the camera we're choosing for our short, or for our film, in this case, our lesson. And we're going to go ahead and put that in Unreal. So 36.7, 15 by 31. Let's go ahead and do that. 36.7 by 15.31. And you'll see that we have a 239 aspect ratio right here, nice and wide, widescreen, which is what most movies shoot on, although it doesn't have to be that. That's what I'm choosing for this. And the sensor size is fairly large. So now that we've chosen our sensor size, we can go ahead and start framing up a little bit better. So let's go ahead and look at our focal length. Again, we're going to look at this stuff in more detail later on. For now, I just wanted to give you what it looks like to change these pretty quickly. We're framing up a close-up here. I like to choose a 40 mil. It's not a 50, it's not a 35, it's something in between. 35 might tend to be a little wide for a close-up. 50 might tend to be a little bit long. I personally really love the 40 mil on this size sensor, and so that's what we're going to go with right now. So type in 40, and of course we've punched in now, and let's set up a nice close-up frame. We can go ahead and drag our focus all the way to the left until we're sharp. Again, we can use the Draw Debug focus plane right here to help us with that. Magical tool. Okay, great. And we can now move around a little bit and frame up. You see that with the 40 mil, we're getting a nice close-up, but we're still seeing quite a bit of the room, and we can use that to frame up. Like if we wanted to profile, we can see a little bit more on the background there. If this was a longer lens, maybe it would throw out the background out of focus more, but it might just constrain the field of view and we wouldn't see as much of our room as we'd want. So let's do something like this for now. And before we move on, let's do a little bit of some changes as well. So you'll see down here, current aperture is 2.8. Let's get a little bit more open with that. So let's go to 1.8, almost a wide open lens. I think depending on what lens you want here, you might do something more closed, more open. You'll see that the image got brighter. That's normal. That's because we just opened up the aperture. That's okay. We're going to change all of that stuff in a second. And once again, we'll be looking at this in more detail down the line. So let's do 1.8. That affects our depth of field. And let's also go into the search details tab over here and look for exposure by typing EXP. We're going to actually click this metering mode. It goes really bright for a second. We're going to hit manual. Now it's going to go dark once we click the exposure compensation at 1, and let's hit 6. Now we're looking at a pretty nice image. So what I just did there, and we'll look at it in more detail down the line, is I just set the exposure mode to manual and I brought the exposure compensation to 6. And you can drag this number one way or another, and you can just feel it out where you'd like the exposure to be. I thought that 6 looked pretty nice for this. And think of it as like ND filters, essentially, because we're just doing the exposure on this particular camera. So that's what that does. I wanted to set this camera where it needed to be for exposure and aperture, and more or less get close to what we had in the original frame. Let's take a look. Did we get close enough? If we go to our close-up Ziva, yeah, I'd say that's pretty close. I actually like this frame a little bit better than the one we did. Just a little bit nicer, I think, with the composition. So that's how we get to that point. And yeah, maybe we come up a little higher. Yeah, that's what it was. We're a little bit too low there. And then again, let's go back to close-up Ziva and make sure our focus is set to the closer eye at least, or maybe right in the middle should be good. Okay. So that close-up is set and we're feeling pretty good. We showed you the step-by-step on how to get to that point. And now what I'd like to do is quickly go through a demo, visually demonstrate how, depth of field and focal length and sensor size affects your frame. So let's go ahead and load up a new map. So if we go to maps over here in your content browser, interior VC maps, demos, and then sensor size demo. Go ahead and save what we've done. We've gone into our sensor size demo map, and we're going to go ahead and load up the sequence under cinematics. By the way, if you get this glitch right here with her hair, quick fix is to just go ahead and check this live link face head on and off, and then go ahead and click back into the sequence. That'll reload her essentially, and that glitch will go away. So now that we're here, just want to quickly point out what we have going on. You'll see that we have 3 cameras. I did a large format 25 mil, a large format 50 mil, and a small format 25 mil. So what does that mean? Essentially, I've changed the sensor sizes on these and as well as the focal length, and we're going to demonstrate exactly how those things play with each other. So if I go to Window, I'm going to load up a new viewport here, viewport 2, and let's go ahead and perspective. Let's load in the small format 25 mil lens and camera. And on the right side, let's load up the large format 50 mil. And what we're going to see here is that even though both frames are almost identical, we have a very different image, right? So on the left, we have a small format. So what I did is it's essentially exactly half of the sensor size on this side, right? Which is the Alexa LF that we did, the 36.7 by 15.31. I divided that in half, and I also put in a longer lens. Then that's why we're getting exactly the same frame. But what does it do to the image? Well, on the right side, we see that the bokeh in the out of focus plane is a lot more pronounced, right? So we see the nice bokeh is like kind of blooming back here. And just in general, the depth of field is just more shallow on the right side. And on the left side is less pronounced. So that's one big difference in sensor size. The larger the sensor, usually typically the shallower your depth of field is going to be. Also, your lenses are going to appear wider. So this 50 mil on the large format looks like the 25 mil on the small format. I'm going to go ahead and hit G here. We don't see that. Okay. And if we load up another lens or another camera and we go to our large format 25 mil, which is the same size lens as the small format, you'll see that we're much, much wider. And even though we're on the same lens, the size of the sensor really changes the feel of the shot. In this case, they're very different shots. But if I were to grab this camera and try and match the framing, so like a chest up profile close up, I'll just roughly do this, chest up, the head to top of head. Even though the frame size on her is relatively similar, the framing is very different. We have the window over on the right side. We catch almost all of this window on the wider lens. And that's because, the field of view on a larger sensor is going to be way wider. So I just wanted to quickly demonstrate that. We'll go into more detail later again. Just don't worry. Just be aware that we are going to go over this stuff later as well. If you don't catch it here, we will be catching it later. So I just wanted to show that to you guys. And hopefully you understand a little bit about what sensor size and also aspect ratio might do. And to demonstrate one more time on this large format 25 mil, we can see what a different aspect ratio would look like. So even though I would keep the same overall size of the sensor, we can go ahead and do a 36:7 on the height. And we have a square aspect ratio, right? So now we have a 1:1 on the sensor width and sensor height, and that changes completely how we might compose our shots, right? So the focus isn't working here, but that's okay. This is just a quick little demo. Interesting to see how aspect ratio might completely change. And this is a pretty drastic example, obviously, but how you frame up a shot. And so that's pretty much it. Keep that in mind when you're setting your camera, when you're choosing a sensor size, that this will impact completely how your shots look, how your composition looks, the choices of lenses, how close you are to the actors, etc. So that was the very first thing we're going to do when dealing with cameras, is setting a sensor size. Essentially, we're picking our camera just like we would in real life, whether it's a Red or an Alexa or a film or whatever it is. We are choosing that as well inside of Unreal Engine by choosing our sensor size. So now that that's done, we're going to go ahead and move on to Module 4, where we're going to determine our lens choices within our shots. So we're going to look at focal length and focus.